Hi, everybody. My name is Charlene Margot, and I am co-founder of the Parent Venture with my partner, Bev Hartman, who is handling the chat today. We bring you the Parent Education Series, and this is the last event in our season of the English Parent Forums. The Parent Forums are actually an initiative of the Sequoia Healthcare District, one of our funders, and we're so glad that you can all be here today. For those of you who got our last emails about cancel and back on, thank you. It is truly Friday the 13th. Eran had a little family emergency, but he's back and he's here, so we are good to go today. This is an important and timely topic, supporting your upset child or teen. And we had a huge amount of interest for this event. More than 130 of you registered. So we know for a Friday in May that is a big deal. Again, we want to say special thanks to the Sequoia Healthcare District. This program is an initiative of the Healthcare District and Dr. Karen Lee, along with our other sponsors, the Sequoia Union High School District, the Redwood City School District, and this program, the Parent Venture. For those of you who are joining us today as returnees, welcome. Really glad to have you back. For those of you who are new to the Parent Forums, I'll just tell you a little bit about how we roll. Our presenter, Dr. Eran Magen, is going to speak to you for about 20, 25 minutes, and that piece will be recorded. And then we turn the cameras off so that the discussion piece of this program can be confidential. So just want to let you know, we are recording again the content portion, then we turn the cameras off, and you are welcome to join us in this virtual parent forum. We are, again, as I said, recording, and the video will be available soon in our video library. We partner with the Boys and Girls Club of the Peninsula to produce our videography. We really want to hear from you today. This is a meeting format, so you have the chat button, and we ask that you look there for resources that Bev will be posting, and also put your questions there if you have any for Eran. But really, we want this to be an open forum, so feel free to put your questions in the chat, but he will probably be asking you to follow up. If you're comfortable turning on your cameras, we'd love to see you, and maybe even your microphone if it comes to needing a little bit more information about your question. All right, let me tell you a little bit about today's featured presenter. Dr. Eran Magen is the founder of Parenting for Humans, a judgment-free, relationships-first approach to parenting that gives parents tools to enjoy stronger, more joyful relationships with their children and themselves. He's also the founder of Early Alert. It works with universities, hospitals, public schools, and first responder agencies to prevent suicide and promote wellness among students and employees. Dr. Magen earned his MA in education and PhD in psychology from Stanford University and completed postdoctoral training in population health as a Robert Wood Johnson Health and Society Scholar. He also served as the research director for the University of Pennsylvania's Department of Counseling and Psychological Services. His work has been published in top-tier scientific journals, including Psychological Science, Emotion, and Academic Pediatrics, and he's been cited in popular media ranging from Allure Magazine to Psychology Today, and our friends Bill Stixrud and Ned Johnson. Eran, we're so glad that you could be with us today. Take it away.
Thanks, Arlene. Hi, everybody. Happy Friday. So for those of you who are in adventurous mood, I would really love to have more video feeds on. Otherwise, I can just pretend to only be talking to Charlene and Craig. We've been doing that a lot, so that's fine. But thank you, Aaron, Galit, Invisible Wesley, materialized. Okay. Okay, this is nice. Now there are people, more people, Kelly and Sally. Okay, now they're joining in rhyming names. Amazing. Okay, so let me share my screen so we all know we're actually in Zoom. And then we'll start. So my goal here is to present ideas for maybe 20 minutes or so, and then for us to talk as a community and just have a conversation about either this or any other thing that's on your mind. I'm recovering from a very short and very mild cold, but my voice sounds like this. 2 days ago, I sounded like a teenager. It was amazing. My voice just kept doing this. But for now, just bear with me if you would. My email address is there. I'll put it later in the chat. You're welcome to use it whenever you want for any reason. Which is to say, if you have ideas or questions or thoughts, like really do just get in touch. People sometimes just email with questions and then we set a time to talk and we just talk like people. There's a URL at the bottom here where you can get the slides that I'm going to be showing you. I'll show you the URL at the last slide as well, and then we'll put it in the chat too, so you can get this if you want. And then the one thing I want to say before I start that I've been trying to remember to say always, one, so there are a few things, not just one thing. One is everything that I'm going to tell you here is an opinion, ultimately. I think ultimately everything is an opinion, right? I mean, this is based on stuff that I've learned, and this is based on stuff that I've experienced, but it's okay to disagree, and it's okay if you do things differently. And it's possible that only some of the things that I say will resonate with you and you'll want to try them. Great. So I'm hoping you'll take what you want, but I'm not pretending for a second to know everything about everyone in everybody's life. But hopefully some of this will be helpful to you. So that's number one. Number two, just in case I forget to say it at the end, but I'll try to remember it too. You are awesome. You are awesome parents. You are awesome for being here. You're awesome for just taking time to think about how to parent and how to help your kids more. This is not trivial. A lot of people, most of us, just most of life, just kind of fly through life and do the best we can. And you're actually dedicating time to do this. So amazing. Hooray for you, and how great for your kids. You're doing a good job. You care, and you're learning, and you're trying. This is really most of what anyone could expect of anyone else. So good work. You're starting at 100 and you're not going to go down. So congratulations. And then the last bit is that everything that I tell you here, in a sense, is aspirational. I try to do it as much as I can, but I don't do it all the time, right? So we're not aiming for perfection here. And again, I'm not pretending to be perfect at this. I'm giving you my best advice, which I try to take as well, but it's not like I do it all the time perfectly. So now that we've sufficiently reduced both the hopefully performance anxiety on your part and the credibility on my part, I'm going to begin. I'm thinking about, when I think about interactions between people, I think about how much emotional intensity is in a given moment, from high to low. And if intensity is pretty low, there are no big, strong emotions. This is a time that we spend on building relationships. That's kind of times of peace. And this is where we dig the well, and the goodwill between the people there, in this case, us and our kids. When emotions are pretty high or higher, and this can be any strong emotion, positive or negative, fear or jealousy or anger or pride or joy or what have you. This is a time that we might choose to switch into more of a supportive role, and we draw to an extent on the relationship that we've built during that green phase. I'll talk about that more in a minute. And then when emotions are super high, when there's a lot of distress, that's crisis. And the rules change really in crisis, as I see it, right? In crisis, we prioritize safety at the expense of relationships sometimes, right? We do things to other people that they don't always want done to them. And that can hurt the relationship short term, but we want to keep them safe. And whereas the rest of the time, both green and yellow, I would say the top priority is the relationship. Always orienting to making the relationship stronger at the expense of basically everything else is my philosophy, not everyone's philosophy. But I would at least suggest putting it like in the top three. Today, we're in this yellow zone, right? You're spending time with your kid. You realize that your kid is having some strong emotion, presumably negative, that you want to help your kid process. All right, quite possibly the first Zoom recorded blowing of the nose. Okay, so this is the context. We know that our kid is upset. We're having this kind of conversation, and for the sake of the time when I'm talking about it, that we can talk about other versions later on during the Q&A. But as I go through it, I'm going to assume that your kid is upset with something that is not you, just to kind of keep it simple. But then we can make it more complicated if we want. So starting point is this: your kid walks through the door kind of looking like this. And you say, okay, what do I do? How do I actually help? What can I do that would be helpful for my kid? And so here's the punchline. I'll give you the bottomest of lines for those of you that only have 30 seconds of concentration available on this Friday. The bottom line is that when the emotional charge is high, the other person cannot process anything, cannot take in anything that you tell them. There's no points, like pouring water into a full glass. So convincing, giving them advice, telling them to look at the situation differently, to appreciate the good things in life, none of that penetrates, none of that. So the only thing to do when somebody else, including a child, is upset is help them release this emotional charge. And once that emotional charge is released and they're calmer, then you can have a normal conversation, and then you can unleash the full load of your wisdom on them. Okay, so that's the bottom line. That's really it. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. It was nice to see you. For those of you who are choosing to stay, we'll talk about the mechanics of how to help your kid release the charge.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
I just joined. Did we just end it?
Congratulations. No, it was a little bit of a joke, but no, you're here at a good time. The punchline just ended.
One.
But otherwise, we're okay. Sorry to be confusing. So, so before I go into the mechanics, I also want to add a little bit of a kind of a bigger picture piece here. I think about pain as being different from suffering, right? And pain is essentially an immediate, almost like biological reaction, unconditioned, doesn't require a lot of processing, like tastes good, tastes bad, hurts, feels good, things. So pain is this initial reaction that we have, and suffering is what happens when we resist reality, when we resist the existence of the pain, right? And suffering is really bad. That's when, like, it's one thing to be caught outside in the rain, it's another thing to be upset at the weather, right? And so the idea is that resisting the bad thing, resisting the existence of this painful thing, causes suffering for us. And this is a little bit of a slippery term to define. My point is not that we should accept everything coming our way and just be fine with it and sit there and, be abused by the world. My point is that resisting the fact that reality right now is like this is causing suffering. So the cleanest example that I have of this is when I walk outside and it's cold, which is to say when I walk outside, not in California, and I'm wearing a coat and the wind is just slicing through me and it's horribly cold. And I go like this and I go, and at some point I realize I'm doing this and I just relax a little. And it's still cold, but it's not as horrible if I can allow it to just be cold. And I can still be looking for a place to go and be warm, right? It doesn't change how I think about the future, but I stop resisting the present. So resisting the present, in my mind at least, is the thing that generates suffering. And should is a word that comes up a lot with this kind of resistance, right? Shouldn't be this cold. He shouldn't be talking to me this way. I should have gotten a higher grade. I should be able to jump farther. You shouldn't have broken my toy. You should be cleaning the dishes, whatever it is, right? The should is kind of a hint. There's nothing wrong with the word itself. It's the concept, of should, right? When we say should, there's a potential for a kind of resistance to present reality. Being able to accept is the opposite of resisting reality. So to say, okay, it is cold right now, just that, right? As simple as that. That's the start of acceptance. Being able to say, I got a bad grade. Right? Just that, just being able to say I got a bad grade without saying I should have gotten a higher grade. Big difference between those two. And you can still say, how do I get a better grade next time? Right? But if you can stop the self-beating, then a lot of the suffering comes out of it. I should have gotten a higher grade. I should have won that race. I shouldn't have said that thing to him. All of these things, right? The should is the suffering there. And crucially, acceptance is something that we can do for other people. We can help other people accept themselves. We can show our kids how we accept them and their experience, even when we wish and they wish that their future experience will be different from their past experience, right? And this is a big part of what we can do as parents and as friends, honestly, for each other too. But definitely as parents, we teach them how to stop resisting reality and stop beating themselves up and start accepting reality and moving toward a better reality. Okay. Mechanics. So this is all in the background, and I'll connect to it later on. The mechanics of a conversation that is supportive, a supportive conversation. I think about conversations as having three components, and they often happen more or less in this order. but not always. So one component is setup, and that's internal. That's my ability to just set aside everything else and focus on my kid who's upset and do nothing else, single tasking. Another element is following, which is where I let the child lead the conversation or the interaction, and I'm actively following and showing that I'm following. We'll talk about this in a moment. I'll talk about this in a moment about how that's done. I'm actively following. This is, I would say, by far the most important part, the most active ingredient in a supportive interaction. When you're able to follow the child well, if the child is upset, a lot of charge gets released in a healthy way. You are containing and accepting this charge and the experience behind it and the facts behind it, and your child ends up feeling better. The leading part, the leading ingredient, is the part where we start moving the conversation this way or that. Maybe we give advice, maybe we start asking questions to get more clarity and so on, but we're clearly driving at that point. That's the part that we like the most because we feel like we're being the most helpful, but often not. And the older the kids, the more true. I mean, when the kids are really young, we're all geniuses, right? We know all this stuff. But once they're not so young, like when they're 5, basically, they, you may not blow their mind every single time you say something. And when they're 12, they know everything. And so if you think of a solution and you tell it to them when they're upset, there's a 50-50 chance they'll just be insulted that you thought it didn't occur to them before, right? So main ingredient, following. Setup, leading, very important as well. The goal of setting up is to be present with your child in the conversation. The goal of following is to let them release charge, help them release charge. And the goal of leading, I would say, when we're doing the leading part, is to think very hard about how do we equate power between us and the child, because we build so much power during the following phase, and we have so much power anyway as parents. I'll talk more about that in a moment. These are some specific skills. The setup skills, these are things you all know. I'm not going to spend time on this, right? Basically just put stuff away and look at them. And as much as you can, focus on them. In the following skills, I'll give an example of the main skill here, which is, I call it WIG. WIG is an acronym for what I got. It's paraphrasing. Paraphrasing is just such a long word. So I go with WIG. And that's the main thing I do. So let's talk about this for a moment. Examples of WIGs. So the idea is that when your child says something, you say it back in your own words. And it sounds very hokey, and it's really not complicated. It's hard to do because we want to say more, we want to do more. But it's very simple. So they say a thing and you say it back to them. And then they go, yeah, exactly. And if they say, yeah, exactly, their charge goes down by a point. They feel more accepted. They're able to accept themselves a little more. And they keep talking and you wig and they say, yeah, exactly. And they say, and then this other thing happened. And this other kid came and said this. And you go, oh, and then he did this again. And you're like, yes, yes. And then it kind of calmed down. It's honestly as simple as that. So the idea is that charge wants to express itself. You just need to give it room. You just need to give it company. Right? When we're upset, we want somebody to understand us. We want somebody to get us. Kids are the same way. So all you need to do is be present and demonstrate your acceptance of their experience. And you demonstrate it by telling their experience back to them without adding or changing anything, right? Using your own words. And the idea is that over time, as you do this, every single time that they feel understood and accepted, the charge goes down a little bit. And then they keep talking and they stop talking when the charge is over, essentially. So a couple of ways that you can think about how to paraphrase well. Here are a couple of sort of conceptual tools. One is the spotlight. The spotlight is what is the topic of the conversation? And the idea is that your child is going to place the spotlight as close as your child is comfortable to the thing that is making your child upset. So if your child is upset about feeling like nobody likes him at school, your child may start out by saying, I'm really bored at recess. And talk about, because maybe your child is uncomfortable just even admitting to himself how he feels or what it's about. Or maybe your child is uncomfortable talking about it with you because it's been a topic of previous conflict or too much advice or whatever it is, right? But your child will place a spotlight wherever your child is most comfortable, placing it as close as possible to the thing that's making your child upset. And it's through this circle of light that the charge gets expressed. The metaphor sort of falls apart here, but bear with me. When you are wigging, when you're paraphrasing, the goal of a good paraphrase is to not move the spotlight an inch, right? If you realize that you're starting to change the topic, you're moving it ahead to where you think your child will be talking about, or you move up to yourself and start talking about how things were so much worse when you were little. That's moving the spotlight, stealing the spotlight sometimes. Nobody likes that, right? So the goal is to, your child places the spotlight on something and talks about what your child sees in that light, in that circle. And then you point at that thing and you describe it in your words without adding or removing content or meaning. We just describe the same thing. And your kid goes, yeah, and your kid will move the spotlight a little bit closer to what's upsetting every time. Another way to think about it is like driving. So imagine the terrifying, hold in your mind the terrifying image of getting into a car with your child driving. When they're upset, a conversation with them is like that. They're driving you around, showing you stuff that's activating for them. And you're in the passenger seat and they're saying, see, this is where this thing happened. They'll drive you to the Dairy Queen and they'll say, this is where all my friends, made fun of the flavor that I picked. It was so dumb. And you're like, wow, they just got on your case because of which flavor you had. Your kid goes, yeah. And I couldn't get it, because I've been getting the same thing for a year. And I think it's this girl. I think it's Ashley that's kind of, pitting everybody against me. And you're like, oh, so it's this one girl that's driving everybody. Right. This is the conversation. And then you're done with the Dairy Queen and your kid drives you to another place. And then you talk about what's there. And you never, ever grab the wheel. They're driving. It's very dangerous to grab the wheel when somebody else is driving. And you never, ever lean over and press the gas pedal with your arm to move the conversation faster. That's not your responsibility. You're the passenger. Conversations like this might be slower. They'll stop, they'll think. They suddenly have space to think, right? You don't need to move the conversation forward. They will. So spotlight, wheel. Here are a couple of examples. So a WIG, again, is an acronym for what I got. And the idea is you just say back what the other person said. And you say it with caring and acceptance as much as you have and as much as you can. The goal is to keep the spotlight where your partner, your kid in this case, left it. And it's not anything else. So it's not asking for information. It's not adding interpretations. It's not promising things will be okay. It's not expressing judgment, positive or negative. It's not taking on their emotion. None of that. You just say it back warmly and caringly. That's it. So maybe your kid says, I have no idea what's going on in math. I was sort of getting it until a month ago. And then we started getting into integrals or whatever it was. And I just have no clue what's going on anymore. I don't even like math. And so you might say, I don't blame you. I hate math, which is not great, right? I mean, it's kind of a nice thing to say and maybe trying to side with them, but really you start talking about yourself. You're starting to show your kid kind of what's the right solution here. It's okay to not like math. And you're not talking about your kid's experience. You might say, you talked about it with the instructor, which is a great idea, but this is not the right time. If your kid is upset, right? If they're still above that arbitrary dotted line, they can't hear it. You'll say, if you talk with the instructor, they'll say, oh, the instructor's stupid, right? Whereas you might get a totally different reaction if you suggested this later when they're calmer, right? So when you have these flashes of brilliance, just make a mental note and keep them for later. Because while the kid's upset, all we want to do is help the kid release charge. So you could say something like, so math was making sense to you until you got into expanded integrals. And your kid might say, well, yeah, well, I mean, maybe earlier was getting harder, like maybe even before, and they're talking, right? And we'll see where they get. But so a WIG is often, you can often phrase it as a question, because really the driving thought behind a WIG is, am I understanding your experience correctly? Am I getting this? And you keep trying to get them to say, yeah, you got it. That's the goal in your mind. And if you get it wrong, that's okay. As long as you're trying in good faith, they'll correct you, right? So if you say, oh, so it was making sense till you got into expanded integrals, and your kid might say, no, 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 no. I'm not saying it made sense to me. I was getting it, sort of, but I wasn't. That's fine. They're still talking, right? Like you can't go wrong when you're wigging in good faith. Like just try to say it back. Just try to understand their experience. Or you might say, well, you're a smart kid. You can figure it out, right? Not helpful, right? Now they feel like they're supposed to be smarter. You know, you're not available to really be of help there. And so again, this is something you might say later, depending on your dynamic with your kid, right? But not in the instant that your kid is upset. When they're upset, it's when we're upset, it's not helpful for somebody else to tell us, you have nothing to be upset about. We need to be upset for a minute. And then afterwards, we can start processing, right? With more of our brain. Okay, so another example. Your kid might say, maybe I took on too many commitments. You know, I'm leading all these clubs. I'm trying to do all these different things. I thought it would be fun, but now I'm just totally stretched and I'm not enjoying any of it. So same deal, right? What are the kinds of things that we might say? We might say, well, yeah, you probably took on way too much, haha. Which if they're genuinely upset, probably not really helpful at that point, right? You can say, right, great advice. Can you figure out which commitments aren't so important? Just drop them. And if your kid is not upset, your kid might say, I mean, they all seem important. What do you, and then a conversation. But if your kid is upset, your kid might say, no, I can't do any of, like you're just kind of butting heads. If you're offering solutions too soon, right? It's kind of like your solution against your kid's problem. That's not, or you're sorry, if you're offering a solution too soon, it's your solution against your kid's charge. That's not a war anybody's going to win, right? So just hold off with the solutions. Oh, come on, you're probably just a little tired. Just get some rest and you'll feel better. Honestly, great advice. If it comes to me, if you ever see me and I'm looking cranky, just tell me to go take a nap and I'll take it. I'll believe you. But I have the advantages of, you know, having known myself for 40 some years now. So I don't know if all kids would be willing to do this. Again, good advice, but maybe later, even when people are cranky, like hear them out and then give your advice, right? As opposed to say something like, well, so it sounds like your commitments are going to be a lot for you. Your kid's like, a lot? Yeah, like way too much. Like yesterday at tennis club, they asked me to, and they're going and they're starting to unload. Great, they're releasing charge. Okay, so the idea is that as the conversation goes, they talk, you wig, charge goes down. They talk, you wig, charge goes down. They talk, you wig, charge goes down. And eventually they stop talking and they're done. They seem less upset. And so that's when you check if they're really done talking, basically if you can switch to leading. And that's the summarizing part. I'm skipping over the ask clarifying questions there, but I'll say this parenthetically. In a following stage, you really don't need to ask questions unless you're actually lost. Like a clarifying question is like, sorry, you said Julie. Do you mean Julie from school or Julie from soccer? Like that's a clarifying question. Essentially nothing else, right? And any question where you're starting to move the conversation into a different direction is not a clarifying question. And it's really risky because, again, you don't know where your kid is going with this. And sometimes your kid is trying to tell you something very sensitive, very embarrassing, very scary for them to say. And if you give them an out, if you start talking about something else, they'll take it, right? If they want to tell you that they're worried that their friend is pregnant and they start by talking with you about how, what might they start talking about with you? How it's, I don't know, impossible to like how they miss going out with friends because they just want to start talking about friends in general. They miss going out to the movies, everybody together, or whatever it is they talk about. And you start talking about that and you start being like, well, have you considered going ice skating? Because there's an outdoor skating rink. But they'll just be like, okay, I'm definitely not going to talk about this terrible thing. Let me just talk about what mom is saying we should be talking about, right? So that's a big risk of leading too soon, right? You might be derailing them from this very important thing they want to tell you and they're not quite comfortable yet. And during the course of a conversation, you're building a lot of trust with them as you're listening well. And then they'll get there. I'm past my a lot of times. So I'll try to accelerate here. But when they're quiet, when they talked and you wigged and they talked and you wigged and they kind of slow down, then you can always summarize to see how they're doing. And a summary is essentially a big wig. It's like 2-3 sentences telling the whole arc of the story. Okay, so you're saying that you're talking, blah, 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 wigging, they stop, everybody's quiet. You count to 6, not to 3. You count to 6 in your head, and then you say, okay, so let me see if I'm getting this right. You've loved math, right? For a long time, we know this, and you did really well in math. But then this year you noticed it was getting harder and harder for you. And at the same time, it kind of became less interesting for you as well. And what you realized is that you're just bored. Like, it used to be fun for you, but now it's boring to do. And your sense is that it's because you're bored that you just don't feel like practicing as much. You just used to practice a huge amount. And now you're getting lower grades, but you feel bad about it, because it's hard to kind of let go of the idea of being, in the top of your class. That's a summary, right? That's like a bunch of wigs strung together. So after a summary, one of two things will happen, basically. Either your kid will say, yeah, and I also want to, and they just keep going, which is great. More charge will be released. And usually here they'll talk about more meaningful things if you get this kind of an uprise, right? So you say this thing about math, and then they'll go, yeah, and more generally, like, I'm just not sure that I see the point in school, because I see, like, all the successful people I know basically dropped out of school. Like, why are we? Or they might say, yeah, and at the same time that I'm letting go of math, I'm also worried, like, how will people know that I'm smart at all? Like, am I smart if I'm not good at math or whatever? Like, it goes deeper, more and more important if they go to. So it's great if you summarize and they keep going. Congratulations, you've hit level 2, basically. At which point you know what to do, right? You wig until they get calmer. Or they'll say, yes, you're right. You give the summary and they just go, yep, that's exactly it. Then you're done. So that's the dipstick test to see if they're still upset. And once you summarized and they said, yep, you got it, then you go into the leading portion. And the leading, I'll just say really quickly, the goal in leading is basically to not ruin all the goodwill you've built when you were following, right? And I recommend focusing on, as much as possible, equating power during that phase. So as a parent, automatically you have a lot of power over your kids, whether they explicitly acknowledge it or not, right? I mean, childhood is essentially about not having power. And so, and as you listen to someone, even if you do this with your friends, right? The more you listen and the more people expose and share and so on, like, they become more and more vulnerable, and you build sort of contextual power. One of the problems with having too much power is that the other person doesn't feel like they have the power to say no. And then you'll just never know if you're suggesting horrible solutions, because they'll say sure, and maybe they'll never implement, right? Or in an extreme case, they'll blow up at you, but there's not like that comfortable middle of the road option of just having conversation in case you give a solution that's not quite right, or a suggestion that doesn't quite make sense, right? And so ideally, you want to be a team. You want to be both of you looking at the problem and trying to solve it. So here are a few quick things that you could do. One, this I try to do all the time. I try to do all the time, is ask for permission before I start giving advice, or even before I start leading, before I start asking questions or whatever it is. Literally asking permission. Can I make a suggestion? I might say, or I might say, well, I have some ideas. Do you want to hear? Or I might say, can I ask some questions to help me understand this better? Right? All this comes after they're calm, right? After we summarize. But I'll say one of those things, and they'll usually say, yeah. And if they say no, then I don't. They just gave me a big tip, a big hint. If they say, no, I don't want advice right now, then I do not give advice right now. Because what's the point? Okay, so if they said yes, then I'll ask my questions or give my advice or whatever. But while doing it, I'm also going to signal really clearly that I am well aware of the fact that I don't know everything about this, and that I welcome their input and their disagreement. So I might say something like, well, okay, can I make a suggestion? Do you want a suggestion here? Sure. Okay, so, but, and before I say this, I want to say, obviously, you've been living this for the past year, and I saw parts of it from the outside, but this is really the only time we're talking about it. So I'm like hearing about this for 10 minutes, and you're living it for a year. So clearly, I don't know all of the facts, right? And so tell me what it is that I'm missing. But from what you're saying, it sounds to me like Ashley from Dairy Queen, Ashley is kind of really thinking a lot about the, how much people like her versus how much people like you, and that it's kind of a zero sum in her head, like either that they like either her or you, right? And so it's kind of a war as you see it, right? Like you see her as kind of coming out. That's how I'm getting it from what you're saying. Again, I don't know all the details, but I wonder if it might make sense to think about ways to show her, or maybe talk with her about the fact that it doesn't have to be an either or. Like, for example, do you think that it would make sense to invite her to just sit together and talk a little bit, and just get to know each other, instead of just like only looking at each other from across the picnic table? What do you think? Could that work? Right. So compare this with, even, let's say I ask for permission. I say, can I make a suggestion? Yeah. I think you should sit down with Ashley and just have a conversation about this. Because, I mean, obviously she thinks it's, a war. It's like either you or her. So why don't you not make it a not war? It has a chance of flying, right? But the first version has such a bigger chance of the kid saying, well, there was a thing that happened actually that did make it more like a war, and more detail. And this is helpful, right, when your kid participates. So the goal is to invite participation, to be a team, and to make it very easy for your kid to say, no, your solution is not great, let's keep talking about it, as opposed to your solution sucks and let's not talk about it, right? This is the main reason I harp on equating power. Okay. Oh, we're done. So let me scroll backwards a little bit. Yeah, just for this. So this, again, this is the structure that I'm thinking about setting up, then following, mainly by paraphrasing, by wigging. And then leading the focus is equating power, and following the focus is accepting your kid's experience. So your kid can feel accepted, but also learn to accept his or her own experience from you, right? Reduce that life should be different right now. Reduce this, like I'm all alone in this pain. Increase this is life right now, and it's okay. It's okay that I did that thing. It's okay that I'm experiencing this thing now. And now let's think about what happens next, right? So many good things happen from this tiny little thing, a paraphrase. Paraphrase communicates your care, your acceptance, your interest, your understanding, right? So many good things happen as you paraphrase. Okay, now that's it. Again, the URL is below, and we'll put it in the chat as well. And my email is there, and we'll put that in the chat as well. And that is the end of